read a passage. I want you to tell me if any of this sounds familiar to you. Okay, this is the country that just voted yes to quote unquote protect human rights. This is what that very same country did to its Tamils in 2009. If you guys are new here, if you guys have never watched my show before, I talk about South Asian news. I'm the Indian Hasanabi. I'm the Tamil Hasanabi. I'm talking about South Asian news. When can I watch the next stream? Next week. I stream on weekends only. Again, I stream on weekends. I would love to stream every day. Streaming doesn't pay the bills. The bulk of the convoy drove out. The remaining 7 trucks moved north to the area after the Sri Lankan government had just demarcated as a safe or no-fire zone. That morning, the Air Force had dropped leaflets advising civilians to take shelter in the 35 square kilometer zone adjacent to the main road. The UN workers set up a food distribution hub on a large piece of open ground well inside the safe zone, which was already crammed with thousands of people. The 2 international staff used their satellite phones to transmit their location to the military, while more civilians settled around the UN, assuming they'd be safe with the foreigners. During the day, shells started landing occasionally, but by the nighttime, the UN staff found themselves under extremely heavy fire from cannon, mortars, and shells from multi-barreled rocket launchers that pounded the area. The white UN vehicles were covered in dismembered body parts, and the corpse of a baby hung from a tree. UN employees had flak jackets and helmets, and had hired laborers to dig them an earthen bunker topped with sturdy tree trunks for protection against flying shrapnel. But the Tamil civilians were in the open, totally exposed, with only tarpaulins for shelters. They stood no chance as the shells ripped them to bits. In 48 hours of bombardment, the aid workers counted 1,000 shells falling into the field where they had set up food distribution point, which was just 500 meters square. The 2 UN staff could do little more than listen to the screams of people dying beside their campfires as artillery blasted them, wrote the former UN spokesman Gordon Weiss later. By the way, Gordon Weiss is the guy that is in the Killing Fields documentary. I'm pretty sure it's the same guy. Gordon Weiss is in that documentary. The shrill cries for help turned into moaning that gradually stopped as the injured women and children bled to death. The Bangladeshi colonel later told a UN investigation panel that it was nothing short of intentional murder of civilians. As an experienced military man, he concluded the fire came from army positions. One explosion injured a UN staff member. Every half hour, the aid workers were on the satellite phone to UN headquarters or the Sri Lankan army, trying to get them to redirect their fire. They were adamant that there were no rebel fighters in the open ground where they were located, although the rebels did fire mortar guns from positions half a kilometer away and from near the hospital. For 2 nights, the UN came under incessant attack. One shell landed so close to its bunker, it left the inhabitants deafened for a few seconds. Climbing out of their shelter at dawn, the aid workers had to remove the torso of a 17-year-old girl sprawled at the entrance. They found that a third of the laborers that they'd employed to dig the bunker were dead. The men photographed and documented evidence of the slaughter before they fled, lucky to be alive. UN headquarters had managed to negotiate a pause in the fighting for them to drive out. It was the set of a war film, the Bangladeshi colonel said afterwards. Trees were snapped in half, and some were still burning. There were burning vehicles all along the road and bodies everywhere, torn open, lying together with farm animals. In academic circles across the world, the winning strategy is now dangerously referred to as the Sri Lankan option, a new way of crushing terrorism using brute military force rather than a political approach. It involves scorched earth tactics, blurring the distinction between civilians and combatants, and enforcing a media blackout. Proponents tend to gloss over the indiscriminate killing of women and children, the violations of international law, and the crushing of a free press. Worryingly, other countries with ethnic problems have been studying Sri Lanka's approach. the Burmese military, the Thais and the Bangladeshis, for example. This story matters because Sri Lanka is no longer a country whose people did bad things to each other. It's an unexpected piece of the jigsaw on the discourse on global terrorism. This is Dr. Rafat Al-Ariers, If I Must Die. This is the Tamil translation of that. M.A. Nukhman is a Muslim scholar in Tamil Nadu, Muslim professor in Tamil Nadu, M.A. Nukhman. He translated a lot of what happened in a lot of the poetry coming from the Palestinian liberation struggle into Tamil. You may have seen a picture that is the Palestinian version of this map. These are the safe zones that the Sri Lankan government set up. There were makeshift hospitals that were set up in these no-fire zones, in these safe zones. They bombed the hospitals. Here, in these no-fire zones, and this no-fire zone 3 in the town of Mullivaikkal is when it all ended. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, died in these no-fire zones. Near Pudukudiyirpu, near Mullivaikkal. Like, there are people still today in the northern parts of Sri Lanka that have been permanently disabled as a result of Sri Lanka's actions. There are people alive that have lost limbs, that don't have legs anymore. There are people still alive. They also shelled their own government nurses and their own government doctors, just for the record. The people working in those medical tents, yeah, Karna is the resident Ilatamar of the chat. He has family members that are disabled mentally and or physically. This isn't going to get coverage until we fight for it. Unless we fight, this is never going to get the coverage it deserves. There are going to be vloggers like Doug Barnard on YouTube that are exploring the capital of Sri Lanka, Colombo, that are joined by their sister, and together with the Sri Lanka Tourism Board, are going to whitewash the war crimes that Sri Lanka has done against the Tamils. This dude, this American, is complicit in genocide because no one knows about it and no one cares about it. The responsibility falls upon a dumbass like me that is not even from Sri Lanka. I'm from India. I beg to differ. They had to kill the terrorists who were demanding a part of Sri Lanka to themselves. This is what we're up against. We're up against a propaganda machine that is doing everything it can to destroy any equivalences